it is 1942, Zagros Mountains, Iran. An Iranian mountain guide stares at the American convoy preparing to depart and shakes his head in disbelief. These foreigners are planning to drive fully loaded military trucks through mountain passes that locals woe in to tempt, even in summer end. They are redoing it in the middle of winter with snow and ice, making the narrow cliff edge roads into death traps. Every Iranian knows these passes are impassable from November to March. The Americans have been warned the terrain will kill them. The ice will send trucks tumbling thousands of feet down mountainsides. It's suicide. But the American truck drivers, recruited from Montana, Alaska, and other places with mountains and real winters, are checking their tire chains, testing their four-wheel drive systems, and preparing to drive anyway. They're treating Iranian warnings like quaint local superstition, as if men who've lived in these mountains for generations don't understand their own terrain. Within hours, those impossible passes will be filled with American convoy trucks carrying Soviet Lend-Lease supplies. And Iranian guides will watch in stunned silence as the foreigners navigate conditions that conventional wisdom says no vehicle can survive. Today, American confidence is about to collide with Persian geography, and everyone expects the mountains to win. The full story. When American know-how met the Persian Corridor's deadliest challenge. The Persian Corridor through Iran represented one of World War II's most critical and least-known supply routes. A logistical lifeline connecting Allied supplies from the Persian Gulf to the Soviet Union's southern borders at a time when German U-boats made Atlantic convoys desperately dangerous and Arctic routes to Murmansk faced both submarines and brutal weather. The corridor's importance couldn't be overstated. Soviet forces fighting the Wehrmacht's massive invasion needed tanks, trucks, aircraft, ammunition, food, and every other supply modern warfare demanded. And Iran provided the most reliable route to deliver those supplies when other options were failing. The United States had taken over operation of this supply line in 19 bringing American military efficiency and industrial logistics to a region whose infrastructure had been built for peacetime commerce, not wartime emergency. American engineers, logistics officers, and support personnel transformed Iranian ports and railroads into high-capacity supply arteries, moving tonnage that Iranian infrastructure designers had never imagined their systems handling. But there was one problem that American efficiency and industrial capacity couldn't seem to solve. Geography. The Zagros Mountains, running northwest to southeast across much of Iran, presented an unavoidable obstacle between the Persian Gulf ports where supplies arrived and the northern regions where they needed to reach Soviet territory. The roads through these mountains were not modern highways, they were ancient. Trade routes improved only marginally over centuries.
Narrow tracks carved into mountainsides with steep grades, sharp switchbacks, and cliff edges that dropped away into void with no guardrails or protection.
In good weather and daylight, these roads challenged even experienced local drivers piloting light vehicles. Iranian truck drivers who'd spent their lives navigating these routes treated them with profound respect, understanding that one mistake, one moment of inattention, one mechanical failure at the wrong moment meant a vehicle and its occupants tumbling down a mountainside to certain death. And when winter arrived, bringing snow, ice, and visibility, reducing storms to the high pass, the conventional wisdom was absolute and unquestioned. The mountain routes were impassable from November through March, and anyone foolish enough to attempt them was committing suicide. This seasonal closure created a massive logistical problem for the Allied supply effort. The Persian Corridor's capacity was already stretched beyond its design limits, and losing access to the mountain routes for half the year meant supplies could unreach the Soviet Union at the rates the Red Army desperately needed. Cargoes piled up at southern ports waiting for spring when the passes would reopen. Soviet commanders in Moscow, fighting for their nation's survival against German forces, sent increasingly urgent messages demanding more supplies, faster delivery, and no excuses about weather or terrain. American logistics officers in Iran faced an impossible situation. They had the supplies, they had the vehicles, they had the fuel, but geography and weather were stopping them as effectively as if German bombs were falling on the convoys. The mountain passes represented a bottleneck that no amount of American industrial capacity could overcome until someone decided to question whether impassable really meant impossible. The Americans who arrived to operate truck convoys through the Persian Corridor in late 1942 and early 1943 came from a country with its own mountains and its own brutal winters. Recruiters had specifically sought drivers from places like Montana, Wyoming, Alaska, and other regions where winter driving meant dealing with snow, ice, steep grades, and unforgiving terrain. These were men who'd driven logging trucks through mountain forests, hauled freight over passes and blizzards, and learned winter driving in conditions that killed the unprepared. When Iranian guides and local officials explained that the mountain passes were impassable in winter, the American drivers nodded politely and then asked what specific problems made them impassabilists on the roads. Snow accumulation, visibility issues, steep grades, sharp turns. The Iranians described all these hazards, expecting the Americans to understand the impossibility. Instead, the Americans started discussing solutions. Tire chains for ice, convoys with recovery vehicles for stuck trucks, headlights, and careful driving for visibility, engine braking and proper gearing for steep grades, wide turning techniques for to the Americans. These weren't impossible conditions, they were just winter driving. Difficult but manageable with proper equipment and training. The cultural and experiential gap between Iranian mountain guides and American truck drivers created a fascinating collision of perspectives. Iranian guides had accumulated knowledge over generations of what these specific mountains could and couldn't support. They understood the terrain intimately, knew where rock slides occurred, where ice formed most dangerously, where roads became impassable. Their expertise was genuine, and their warnings came from hard-earned experience. But their experience was with lightly loaded vehicles, with drivers who had no specialized winter equipment, with a cultural understanding that nature-imposed limits humans couldn't overcome. The American drivers came from a different tradition of culture that viewed obstacles as problems to be solved through technology and determination, that had developed specialized equipment and techniques for operating vehicles in extreme conditions, and that approached impossible challenges with a confidence that looked like arrogance but was actually based on different experience. When Iranians said impossible, they meant we've never done it successfully. When Americans heard impossible, they heard difficult, but we've handled similar challenges before. The practical preparations the Americans made before attempting winter convoys demonstrated the gap between the two approaches. American military logistics had requisitioned or manufactured specialized equipment, heavy-duty tire chains designed for ice and snow traction, recovery vehicles equipped with winches, powerful enough to pull loaded trucks back from cliff edges, cold weather engines starting equipment, improved headlights for night and storm driving, and communications equipment to coordinate convoys. American drivers received training specifically focused on mountain winter driving. Techniques for descending icy grades using engine braking rather than wheel brakes that could lock and cause skids. Methods for taking switchback turns with trailers that required precise positioning. Protocols for convoy spacing that prevented pileups if a lead vehicle stopped suddenly. And procedures for recovering stuck or disabled vehicles in locations where there was barely room for one truck, let alone recovery equipment. The Americans treated the winter mountain crossing as an engineering problem requiring specific solutions, not as an act of nature that humans simply accepted. When the first American winter convoy prepared to depart for the mountain passes in late 1942, Iranian officials, guides, and local drivers gathered to watch what they were certain would be a disaster. The convoy consisted of dozens of American trucks, primarily GMCs, and other heavy-duty vehicles that U.S. industry was producing in massive quantities loaded with Soviet Lend-Lease cargo bound for the north. The lead vehicles carried experienced drivers who'd been briefed on the route, supported by recovery vehicles positioned at intervals through the convoy. The Americans started their engines, checked their chains, tested their four-wheel drive systems, and began the ascent into terrain that every Iranian present knew was impassable. The Iranian observers expected to be organizing rescue operations and recovering bodies within hours. What they witnessed instead challenged everything they knew about their own mountains and what was possible in winter conditions. The American convoy navigated passes that Iranian drivers wouldn't attempt, using techniques and equipment that local expertise had never employed. On icy grades where vehicles should have slid helplessly, tire chains provided enough traction for loaded trucks to maintain steady progress. On switchbacks where trucks should have slipped off cliff edges,
American drivers executed precise multi-point turns that positioned their vehicles exactly where they needed to be despite ice and limited space.
When trucks did get stuck or slide toward edges, recovery vehicles with their powerful winches pulled them back to safety and got them moving again. The convoy moved slowly, far slower than summer driving, but it moved consistently, treating conditions that Iranians considered impossible as merely difficult problems requiring careful solution. By the time the convoy completed its passage and reached the northern plains, Iranian observers who'd been certainly DB watching deaths instead witnessed a successful crossing that shouldn't have been possible according to all their experience and knowledge. The psychological impact of this success rippled through both Iranian and American personnel involved with the Persian Corridor. For Iranians, it was a demonstration that challenged fundamental assumptions about their own terrain. These were mountains that had shaped Persian culture and history for thousands of years, that had channeled trade routes and military campaigns, that had imposed natural limits on what could move when. Now, foreigners who'd been in the country for months were doing things with those mountains that locals who lived there for generations had believed impossible. The demonstration wasn't just about driving it, was about different approaches to challenges, different assumptions about what technology and training could overcome, and different cultural attitudes toward natural obstacles. For America, the success validated the approach that American military logistics was applying throughout the war. Identify the obstacle, engineer solutions, train personnel properly, and execute with confidence. The Persian Corridor winter convoys became one more example of American problem-solving, overcoming challenges that conventional wisdom said were insurmountable. The strategic implications were enormous. Keeping the mountain passes open through winter meant the Persian Corridor could operate year-round at full capacity, instead of losing half its throughput for 6 months annually. Soviet Lend-Lease supplies that would have been stuck in Iranian ports waiting for spring could now move north continuously, reaching Red Army units that desperately needed American trucks, tanks, aircraft, ammunition, food, and every other supply modern warfare consumed. The tonnage numbers told the story of the Persian Corridor, with year-round operation delivered more supplies to the Soviet Union than all other routes combined during critical periods of the war. Those supplies reached Soviet forces fighting battles that determined whether the Wehrmacht would be stopped or would push deeper into Soviet territory. Every American truck that navigated those Impassable winter passes carried cargo that translated into Red Army operational capability, and the cumulative effect of thousands of truck convoys keeping the supply line open through winter was measurably. Strategic impact on the Eastern Front's outcome. The technical lessons learned from the Persian Corridor winter operations spread throughout American military logistics. The specialized equipment and techniques that worked in the Zagros Mountains, heavy-duty chains, recovery vehicle positioning, convoy coordination protocols, driver training procedures were documented, refined, and applied to other operations where terrain and weather created similar challenges. American logistics officers added supposedly impossible mountain winter driving to the list of problems that proper equipment and training could solve, and that knowledge base contributed to operations in Italy's Apennines, in Burma's mountains, and in other theaters where terrain imposed limits that American logistics needed to overcome. The institutional learning was characteristic of how American military operations evolved to encounter a problem. Solve it practically, document the solution, spread the knowledge, and build organizational capability that made similar future challenges routine rather than impossible. For the Iranian mountain guides and local drivers who witnessed those first winter convoys, the experience was educational in unexpected ways. Some initially viewed American success with resentment, foreigners presuming to know their mountains better than locals who lived their generations. But as winter operations continued, and Iranian drivers began learning American techniques, attitudes shifted toward respect and practical adoption. Iranian truck drivers started requesting the same tire chains, the same recovery equipment, the same training that Americans used. Local transportation companies began modifying their operations to incorporate American methods that clearly worked better than traditional approaches. The knowledge transfer wasn't one-directional. Americans learned from Iranian experience about specific road conditions, seasonal patterns, and local factors that affected operations. But the fundamental shift was Iranian recognition that what they always believed was impossible could actually be done with different equipment and techniques. The human stories from those winter convoys captured the drama of the operation. American drivers navigating narrow mountain roads and blizzards with 1,000-foot drops inches from their wheels, steering overloaded trucks through switchbacks that required backing up on ice to complete turns, driving through whiteout conditions, using only the taillights of the vehicle ahead as references were conditions that tested courage and skill to their limits. Some drivers died when vehicles went over edges despite all precautions. Some convoys got trapped by storms and had to wait days for weather to clear enough to continue, but the overwhelming pattern was successful delivery, with loaded trucks reaching their destinations through terrain and weather that conventional wisdom had declared impassable. The drivers who made those runs developed a justified pride in their achievement. They'd taken impossible missions and made them routine, using skill, proper equipment, and determination to overcome obstacles that had stopped everyone before them. The broader historical lesson from the Persian Corridor winter operations extends beyond the specific context of World War II logistics. It demonstrates how different cultural experiences and technological capabilities can lead to radically different assessments of what is possible. Iranian guides who said the passes were impassable were wrong based on their experience and available equipment. Those passes truly were impassable for the vehicles and techniques traditional Iranian transportation used. American drivers who treated the same passes as difficult but manageable were being arrogantly dismissive of Iranian expertise. They were working from different experience with different equipment that genuinely changed what was possible. The collision between these perspectives produced results that neither could have achieved alone. Iranian knowledge of specific terrain, combined with American winter driving technology and training, created operational capability that transformed the Persian Corridor's strategic value. The Persian Corridor's importance to the Allied victory, and specifically to Soviet survival of the German invasion, cannot be overstated. Stalin himself acknowledged after the war that without American supplies delivered through routes like the Persian Corridor, the Soviet Union might not have been able to continue fighting. The trucks, tanks, aircraft, food, fuel, and other supplies that moved through Iran reached Soviet forces at critical moments when their own production couldn't meet demand. And a significant portion of those supplies moved through mountain passes that could be used in winter until American truck drivers from Montana and Alaska proved that wouldn't just meant had been done yet with proper equipment and training. The winter convoys through the Zagros Mountains were a small piece of the war's vast logistical puzzle, but they exemplified how American industrial capacity, technological problem-solving, and willingness to challenge conventional limitations contributed to Allied victory in ways that did not involve combat, but were nonetheless strategically decisive.